I needed a break, a real one. So I booked a remote cottage tucked deep in the woods of northern Wisconsin. It was supposed to be peaceful. No distractions, no people. Just a quiet escape. I needed to recharge. The drive took longer than expected, and by the time I finally reached the cottage, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a pale wash of light on the snow-covered landscape. The air was cold, crisp, and the wind howled like a distant voice. The cottage looked like something straight out of a storybook. It was small but charming, stone walls, a thatched roof, and surrounded by towering pines. Perfect. I parked and gathered my things, my breath coming out in visible clouds as I approached the door. The key was hidden under the mat, just as the host had instructed. The door creaked open as I stepped inside, and the smell of dust and pine filled the air. It was exactly what I needed. Cozy, old but well kept. There was a fireplace in the living room and a small kitchen off to the side. The fire was already stacked with wood, and a few logs were already burning. The warmth wrapped around me like a blanket. I unpacked my bags, settled in, and turned on the small radio the owner had left for me. Static buzzed from the speaker, and I fiddled with the dial, but it only seemed to make the static worse. After a few moments, I turned it off. The silence was unsettling. No birds, no animals, just the sound of the wind and my own breathing. The first night passed without incident. The fire crackled as I read a book. The storm outside raged on, and I went to bed early, looking forward to the solitude. But when I woke up the next morning, something was off. The house was still, too still, the kind of stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I sat up in bed, straining my ears for any sound, anything. But there was nothing. I checked the windows, snow piled high outside, the wind still howling. The door was locked, and all seemed normal. But something was nagging at me, like a shadow lingering just out of reach. I made my way to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and tried to shake off the unease. But that's when I saw it, on the kitchen floor, a faint smear of something dark. It looked like dried mud or dirt, but it was too red, almost like blood. I swallowed hard and bent down to inspect it, but before I could, the door slammed shut behind me. My heart raced as I spun around. The door was still locked, and I hadn't heard anyone come in. The wind outside was still howling, but there was no one in the house. I slowly checked each room, but everything seemed empty. As I walked through the hall toward the back door, I heard a faint sound, soft, like a whisper. It was coming from inside the walls. I froze. The whispering sound continued, muffled but distinct, like a voice, barely audible, moving around the house. My first instinct was to get out, to leave, but the snowstorm outside was worsening. I couldn't go anywhere. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the hallway, trying to trace the sound. The walls felt cold to the touch, almost unnaturally so. The whispering grew louder as I approached the back wall, where the sound seemed to be strongest. It sounded like multiple voices, too soft to make out the words, but enough to send a chill up my spine. I backed away, my mind racing. What was this? A prank? Some strange old house with a weird draft? Then the lights flickered. A sudden power surge made everything go dark for a split second before the lights returned. But when they did, something had changed. The temperature dropped and the whispering had stopped. That's when I noticed the shadow. It was faint, just a movement at the corner of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. just the empty hallway. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I spent the rest of the day in the living room, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. The whispering never returned, but the silence was unbearable. Every creak of the house felt like someone walking behind me. Every gust of wind felt like it was trying to get inside. At around midnight, I decided to check the basement. The house was old, and the basement was as much a part of the charm as the rest of it. There was a small wooden door off to the side of the living room, and though I had no desire to go down there, something compelled me. The stairs creaked as I descended, the air growing colder with each step. I reached the bottom, and there was nothing but old furniture covered in sheets and boxes of forgotten belongings. The whispering started again, soft at first, then louder as I walked deeper into the basement. It was coming from behind a stack of old crates. I walked toward the noise, my hands shaking. As I pulled the crates aside, I found a small door hidden away behind the clutter. It was old and worn, the wood warped and weathered, as if it had been untouched for years. I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, the whispering stopped. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. I backed away, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the basement, a figure was standing, motionless. A man, his features obscured by shadows, was just standing there, staring at me. My breath caught in my throat. I turned and ran, crashing up the stairs, not daring to look back. I locked myself in the living room, the fire flickering weakly as the storm raged outside. My heart was pounding, my hands slick with sweat. I dialed the owner's number, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. The storm had cut me off from the outside world. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to check the basement again, but I had to. I had to know what that figure was, what was in the walls, what had been whispering to me. When I went down there, the basement was empty. The door I had seen was gone. No crates, no figure, just a cold, empty room. I left the cottage that day. I didn't look back. 2 days later, I got a call from the owner. She said there was an issue with the cabin, something about the history of the place. Apparently, the previous tenants had left suddenly, never saying a word. And when I asked about the cottage's history, she mentioned one thing: the whispers in the walls. But that's a story for another time. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly before me, swallowed by the thick veil of snow. My shift at the hospital had ended late, and now, at nearly 2 a.m., I just wanted to be home. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, turning what should have been a simple drive into a test of endurance. The snowflakes came down in dense sheets, so heavy that my high beams barely cut through the white abyss. It was just me out there. No other cars, no streetlights, just the crunch of my tires on the frozen road and the occasional gust of wind rattling my windows. Then I saw it, a figure standing just off the shoulder, barely visible through the snowfall. My foot hovered over the brake. He didn't wave for help, didn't move at all, just stood there, hunched under a thick coat, hood up, face obscured by shadow. I kept driving, shaking off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe a stranded traveler waiting for help. Maybe a trick of the snow and shadows. But then 10 miles later, I saw him again. The same coat, the same hunched posture, Only now, he was standing closer to the road. My hands tightened on the wheel, my breath coming short. That was impossible. No intersections, no turnoffs, no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I told myself I was imagining things, exhaustion playing tricks on me. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my stomach turned to ice. He was still there, standing motionless in the middle of the road, the headlights catching just the faintest glint of his shadowed face before the snow swallowed him whole. My hands were trembling now. I pressed harder on the gas, focusing on the road ahead. The snow thickened, my visibility dropping to nearly nothing. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself forward, watching my gas gauge dip lower. I needed a station, needed to shake this off. And then, he was in front of me. Not just off to the side this time, but directly in the middle of the road, standing perfectly still. My instincts screamed at me to brake, to swerve, but before I could react, he was gone. Not hit, not dodged, just gone. I slammed the brakes anyway, my tires skidding over the ice, my car lurching sideways before I managed to regain control. My chest heaved, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The gas station appeared through the storm like an oasis, its old neon sign flickering in the dark. I pulled in fast, barely registering the near-empty parking lot. I climbed out, my breath fogging instantly, my body still shaking. The attendant inside was watching something on an old TV, barely looking up as I walked in. "You all right?" he asked, his voice flat. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Saw someone on the road." That got his attention. His eyes flicked up, locking onto mine. "What did he look like?" I hesitated. Heavy coat, hood up, just standing there. The attendant's face darkened. He looked past me toward the snow-covered lot, exhaled sharply, then muttered, "You're not the first." My heart pounded. What? People see him, always out on nights like this. But here's the thing. His voice dropped lower. No one ever sees him leave. I barely remember the drive home. Didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hooded figure standing there, head slightly tilted, as if watching, waiting. The next day I did some digging, checked missing persons reports, local legends. There was nothing. No warnings, no accidents. Just an empty stretch of road and the stories of those who saw him before me. I never took that route again. But sometimes when the snow is heavy, when the road turns to an endless tunnel of white, I think about him. I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the next traveler to spot him. Or worse, waiting for the right one to follow. I was used to late-night drives. It came with the job. Being a traveling nurse meant hours on the road, often in the dark, through long stretches of empty highway. You get used to it, just like you get used to short sleep, bad coffee, and motel rooms that always smell faintly of bleach and cigarettes. That night, I was heading home after a late shift at a clinic outside Olympia. It was nearly 2:30 a.m., and the rain had been falling steadily since I left. The forecast had warned of a storm, but I figured I'd be home before it got bad. The road was empty, just my headlights cutting through the rain, the endless stretch of trees on either side, and the distant glow of my dashboard clock. Then I saw him. At first, I barely noticed. just a shape in the rain, hood up, hands buried deep in his pockets. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't moving at all, just walking at a slow, heavy pace. Something about him made my stomach tighten. I can't explain it, but it wasn't normal. I kept driving, pushing the uneasy feeling away. But a few miles later, I glanced in my rearview mirror. He was there, still walking, still distant, but closer than he should have been. I told myself I was imagining things. Just exhaustion, the rain playing tricks on me. Then up ahead, him standing in the middle of the road. My heart slammed against my ribs. I yanked the wheel, skidding slightly on the slick pavement as I swerved around him. When I looked back, he was gone. I tried to calm my breathing, just my mind playing tricks. That's what I told myself. Then my phone screen flickered. I hadn't touched anything. A chill ran through me. I hesitated, then tapped the screen. The feed from my car's rearview camera flickered to life. He was standing directly behind my car, close enough that if I opened the door, the screen glitched, static, then nothing. I whipped around. No one was there. I hit the gas hard, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they ached. I just needed to get to the gas station, somewhere with lights, somewhere that wasn't this empty, endless road. By the time I pulled in, I was shaking. The station was mostly deserted, just a lone attendant watching an old TV behind the counter. I walked in, my pulse still hammering. The guy behind the counter glanced at me. "You okay?" Before I could stop myself, I said it. I saw someone on the road. His face changed. Not confusion, not amusement, something else. He reached under the counter and pulled out a photograph. It was old. The edges were curled. And in it was him. The same hood, the same stance. A heavy feeling settled in my stomach. The attendant's voice was quiet. "You're not the first." I didn't take that road at night again. But sometimes on long drives, when the rain blurs the world into shadows, and my rearview mirror catches the dim glow of the road behind me, I wonder if he's still out there. Or worse, if he ever made it into someone's car.